Good afternoon, everybody. Scott Stevens here with a look at weather across the United States and a few other stories around the world. What we find outside of the States, however, is either driven by cold in Brazil, in Argentina, in South America, where they, like Australia, have been pounded by an unusually cold winter. Of course, in the more southerly locations, closer to the Antarctic Circle, but the trend is in place that they're dealing with a very cold winter with persistent snows, near or record low temperatures, and then wind. Wind, especially for farmers. That's kind of the threatening thing for animals to either get shelter and get out of those potentially life threatening situations, and certainly shelter from driving frozen precipitation. It's never a situation that farmers want to put their livestock in for an extended period of time. One night is one thing, provided it's not crazy, but when you go on day 2, day 3, and then the next morning you've got a foot and a half worth of snow, for them to try to forage through or to get feed out to, it becomes very stressful for those animals. All right, let's pop on over here and we'll hit the stories. We'll start though stateside. Pretty dire situation in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, where it's a home. It's a fairly large city, 150,000 Americans. But after that derecho event on Monday unleashed sustained 90 to 100 mile an hour winds, which is a good category 2, category 3 hurricane, and it doesn't have to be that long. Our infrastructure just is not developed to withstand that kind of an event for, even a pulse event, but to last 10, 20, 30 minutes, it becomes rather damaging. So good to see you on there. Good afternoon, Jane, out in the valley where it's kind of hot in the San Luis Valley of southern Colorado where I am, and I decided I better turn off the fan so you didn't have to hear that rumbling in the background. And it looks like my picture, for some reason, for the last 2 to 3 days, it's been kind of pixelated, and I honestly, I don't know what to do about it. So many things are, you do all you can at your workstation, you plug in the network cable, and you trust that once it leaves the home, that it'll get to its destination. But what Cedar Rapids, Iowa is dealing with is in some ways unprecedented. The city's still in shambles, and there's still thousands and thousands, and 2/3 of the city still without power. The damage from wind, from trees down, from the lines disconnected from the poles, and so forth and so on, is just a lot to handle. And it's not like a hurricane or tropical storm where you can see it coming for at least 2, 3, 4, 5 days ahead of time, and the power companies can contract ahead of time. You can have workers come in, and you can stage the recovery gear, much like they did in Puerto Rico ahead of time, or they do in Florida, or they do in the Carolinas, as we can see these things coming. But there was 30 minutes warning, an hour warning tops for Cedar Rapids. And so they just haven't been able to position the recovery, the electrical crews, and get the poles and the wiring and all of that stuff back in place to rewire the city. And if you are not buried underground or have underground cabling, then it's susceptible to these kind of events. And those cities that do underground, I lived in Fort Collins or Idaho Falls, Idaho, where they have those utilities underground, they're far more protected from these surface strong wind events, and it's just the way to go if they can afford to. Southern Ontario weekend becoming a little more clear, as models indicating the rain and the thunderstorms from the system in the northwest will be making its way on through. And then Minnesota continues to be hammered by rain. It's been wet and a little bit of a dry spell the first part of the winter, but the summer, but it's wet now, and things have really begun to green up. So the lake fire in Los Angeles County, we're seeing the fire plume. This was actually yesterday, just kind of blew up and then penetrated the troposphere and headed on higher. We saw it on satellite imagery, and we'll see other examples of fires creating this pyroclastic pyrocumulus plume, and this one particular with a lenticular cap, as you see the lenticular formation there. So it's for a weather geek, it's cool. But this is also asking the question, what creates this lenticular formation? Is it electrical? Is there some kind of resonance up there that creates this kind of formation? And then it opens up a whole can of worms for those that are curious about geoengineering and the tools upon which that work rests upon. And ionization, electrical, etheric weather engineering. They're all potent tools if used correctly. Who's got them? Who's using them? And where are they being used? These are questions that meteorologists should be able to ask and get answers every single day, because it impacts, or should impact, and does impact the accuracy of our forecasts. So again, the fire is ongoing in California. This fire raged very, very quickly. It blew up rapidly as everything's crispy dry, just as it is in Colorado right now. And we'll see that happening on the satellite imagery. China flood season leaves 219 fatalities. This is acknowledged fatalities. There are other rumors, if you will, just as there were with coronavirus and its impacts, that were far more accurate in hindsight, that this fatality count is closer to 25,000. And these are numbers that we will never get accurately from the CCP. They'll always put the best face forward or the biggest lie that you will accept. That's just their standard operating procedure. We know it's a whopper of a tale, and we just kind of shake our head and say, it's the Chinese. That's what they tell. Just like their economy. It grew at 8%. It grew at 12%. Of course it did, because that's what you say it did, but that doesn't make any sense. So, unusual triple comet flies past the sun, and Brazil, gripped by historic August cold, and another round of cold blast to hit next week. So there's these southern stories, and this will be the Northern Hemisphere's turn as we sink a little bit deeper, and the acknowledgement that we're in a solar minimum begins to slowly hit the news front. Yes, we've got hot. That's always going to happen as the jet stream goes wacky, with bigger ridges and deeper troughs. That's going to allow for greater heat, but also greater cool on the other part of the wavelength. That little storm we saw circulating off the Carolinas has now been christened Kyle, and Josephine, with his impacts on the states, no impact at all, as it's already kind of headed out to sea. Josephine, however, is a little bit of a different story. It will approach but then recurve up, so its greatest risk is probably to Bermuda in time, but that is beyond the weekend before that happens. All right, here's the heat. From central valleys to California, across the Great Basin, not so much in the northern Rockies, but then really beginning to blossom as we get out towards Pueblo, La Junta, Colorado, Garden City, Kansas, deep into the 90s or low 100s. And then where we have a thunder shower that pops up, then like Amarillo, we'll get a nice 20, 25 degree relief and drop back to about 80 degrees. But in the wake of the bigger thunderstorms that are up in Minnesota, that's where temperatures are far more comfortable. And the video that we saw at the top of the show coming from Minnesota, where there have been big rains, and now we've got a line of intense thunderstorms and then a cool outflow boundary beginning to course away from that explosive storm. And then here's the cool air in the northern northern panhandle of Texas. But it's this plume, Colorado. These are fires right through there. And the lake fire showing up in California. We'll come on in there and look at these. Here's the clouds on this morning were just absolutely bizarro. It was such a weird scenario that was showing up in Minnesota. So wild weather up there as the rains continue on. Let's see if I can't come here. Let's look at Southern California and see if we can't isolate some of these showers. This looks like a smoke plume there. This, not so much. So that's kind of where the fire has been. And now that we've got some sun on it, and no doubt they've got a whole slew of fire crews working on that, but it's this one that's about Cimarron Peak Fire, just west of Fort Collins. You can see it's just kind of explosive. This one also just west of Boulder blew up this afternoon, and then a few others in along this I-70 corridor. And if I'm not mistaken, I-70 remains closed for transit. Well, it doesn't matter whether you're car or semi. I-70 is just closed for that kind of transportation. A slew of tornado warnings across middle part of Minnesota, just west of Minneapolis, as this explosive event is underway. Also southeast of Grand Island, Nebraska, and then some other storms popping up through Oklahoma and into North Texas. These down here a little bit slower moving, so we're likely to get a little more rainfall out of those. And honestly, if we're going to get rain, we might as well get a bunch of it, even though the ground is a little bit on the dry side. The southeast certainly unsettled, And then the humidity in place, there's the slew of dew points at or above 60 degrees, but with West Texas, 107, 108, 105, 106 at Midland, Odessa. It's just plain hot. And the risk of storms, this is actually over here is today, and they're in the red hashed areas where we're seeing the risk of the severe weather, and it shifts farther east and then continues eastbound as we move into the weekend. But what we're curious about is just when will the summer weather end? When will we see these colder areas of low pressure that are starting to form? We've got one that'll settle across the southern plain states or the southern Gulf coastal states for a couple of days, leading them to enjoy some much cooler and wetter than normal conditions into next week. In fact, deep into next week. And then the cold air tries to come ashore across the Pacific Northwest, but just does not have a whole lot of success. Let's hit the precip, and then we'll call it a week. We'll scroll this out, and this is where the GFS, the Global Forecast System, tries to bring in the precip, or at least paints and remembers how much rain has fallen. And some in northern New Mexico, kind of just scattered hit and miss showers that are beyond the resolution of this particular map. But it's Florida and the southeastern states where historically through August there are numerous showers and thunderstorms and the risk of rather inclement weather. But again, it's all not necessarily tropical. And then here's the stripe of heavy rain with Kyle, 8, 9, 10, 11 plus inches. But then Canada's had quite the summer. Not nearly the drought that British Columbia and Alberta were enduring last year, where the fires just persisted into September. This year, a completely different story up there with a lot of water, and that has let their crops just kind of flourish, where stateside, we've been a little more challenged. We just have been more challenged. All right, hey, just thanks for stopping by. We'll end the week right here as we're just going to go on with the heat, probably through Thursday of next week. That's not going to go away anytime soon. So we'll thanks for stopping in, Jane. If you're still around, good to see you there. And I just want to say thanks for coming in. We'll catch you next week on Scott's Weather, Monday, 5 o'clock Mountain and 7 o'clock Eastern. Have a great weekend, and I'll see you then.